He holds a MA in history at age 14. He launched KurtzHistoricSites.com as a means to both document his travels and encourage others to visit grave sites and engage in hands-on history. His website and his cemetery pilgrimages were the subject of a 2015 interview on C-SPAN show Q&A. In 2023, he relocated from Rhode Island to Washington, D.C. To join the staff of Historic Congressional Cemetery, and he concurrently became a next-gen leader with the White House Historical Association. And Kurt is also a graduate of Bryant University, where I work. So welcome Kurt to share with us.
Thank you, Madam State Regent, and thank all you ladies for spending your Valentine's Day with me. Before I start my more talking remarks, I have a book trailer, like a movie trailer, but for my book, which my father also wants me to remind people we accept cash, check, and Venmo. He is my pro bono agent and unofficial assistant grave hunter, so as I say. Anyway, we'll start with this trailer for a few minutes.
Every presidential gravesite and
Yes.
every vice president's gravesite.
Yes.
Why it took 10 years for him to get that, 100 years for him to get that. Go ahead up, you can photograph.
Visit the tombs of every president and vice president. Tag along for a most unusual ride as the author recounts his life-affirming journey to these tombs and from elementary school neophyte to college history major.
So these are the sarcophagi, or basically coffin containers. Each sarcophagus holds a president personally.
With his zany, boundary-pushing father at the wheel, his journey was unorthodox.
Grieving hunter here at the original grave site of Colonel Sanders. But we couldn't find any.
The straight-laced youngster found himself sneaking a camera past Secret Service agents.
But you're gonna tell the story about how you, between you and your father, on the camera, how you got that in there.
We weren't allowed to take pictures, and he's probably lucky he wasn't tasered or anything by the Secret Service.
Purposely locked in a cemetery enclosed with barbed wire.
Sometimes you're gonna get locked in cemeteries, and you have to call security, or you have to climb over the barbed wire.
Handcuffed to the former Dallas homicide detective who was tethered to alleged JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald when he was shot by Jack Ruby.
And Mr. Lavelle here was handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald, and Oswald was then shot during the transfer by a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, and the instance was captured in a famous Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph.
And most daringly, he reluctantly gained entry to a vice president's private family burial ground.
And you know, the one grave site that everybody has trouble getting to, that wants to do this, is the Rockefeller grave
Yes,
site.
Nelson Rockefeller, vice president for Ford.
How did you do it?
Well, as my father likes to describe it, it's an act of God.
Act of God. Are there others in your family?
Yes, my mother, Lynn, and my sister, Olivia, who is 3 years younger than I am.
What does she think about it?
I don't like
I think she said she loves presidents.
In this history-driven memoir, Dymond reconstructs his decade-long cross-country quest and analyzes the evolution of his perspective on the commanders-in-chief and what it means to visit a cemetery.
If you're going to the gravesite of President Marvin Van Buren in Kinderhook, New York, you could probably dig up his grave and nobody would find out a few days. You never truly know exactly what you're going to find at a place or who.
project years prior that we didn't end up going forward with that involves that instrumental music and that nice shot in that 1950s car. So when this trailer opportunity came along, my dad was very happy to finally get that used. Yes, that is the book trailer for my book, Presidential Grave Hunter, that came out in May of 2023. So my presentation today called, I think, President's Day Ponderings. So thank you. And can everybody hear me okay? Great. So as said in the trailer, so I started when I was 8 years old, going to the graves of presidents, also vice presidents, of course the first ladies. Most of them are buried with the presidents, with a couple exceptions. Here we go. So, obviously the DAR is genealogy related. So I don't know if anybody is familiar with the website findagrave.com. It's now owned by Ancestry. So I've been a member of findagrave.com dating back before its Ancestry days, back about 17 years, and I was lurking, researching on there prior to that. But so it's great for a tool for finding, your relatives or anybody in a cemetery. They have about 250 or 300 million burial records now from across the world. But they also help you find notable grave stories, become famous graves. So those get a little more promoted on their website and have a kind of a gold star next to them. So of those famous graves highlighted on findagrave.com, so using their criteria, I have been to 2,909 famous graves. Again, it just started with the presidents, the first ladies, the vice presidents, and then it really snowballed. I ran out of presidents. I visited, at the time, my last president when I was in high school, and my last vice president, I was 19 years old, a sophomore in college. So I ended up going to a lot more graves, and I have some numbers too. So there are 40 deceased presidents. I have been to the final resting places of all 40 of them. There are 44 deceased vice presidents. I have been to all 42 visitable graves. So Dick Cheney passed away a few months ago. No confirmation on his final disposition yet. Suspect, based off of plans that he had about 15 years ago, that he's been cremated, but final disposition not known. Walter Mondale was also cremated after his passing in 2021. His family said that at some point they were going to inter his ashes at a cemetery in Minneapolis. As far as I know now, they still have not yet done so, and that his ashes are in an urn that Mrs. Mondale made, that is assumedly in the Mondale family home. So if anybody here has Ted Mondale's son's contact information to get me into the Mondale home just to pay my respects, I would appreciate that, thank you. There are 49 deceased speakers of the House, and I have been to the graves of 28 of them. And there are Supreme Court justices, 105 deceased. I've been to the graves of 92 of them, and you can visit the graves of at least 103. Two are kind of up in the air right now, Sandra Day O'Connor and Abe Fortas. So at least 11 to go, so I'm pretty far along in that. Also, presidents pro tem, who's in charge of the Senate when the vice president is not presiding over it, which is most days these days. So 89 presidents pro tem, and I've been to the graves of 41 of them. Declaration of Independence signers, of course, we know famously there are 56. I've been to the graves of 45 of them. Also can't get all of them, most notably, I'd say one of them died at sea. His ship was lost, so can't visit that one, for example. 275 deceased baseball Hall of Famers. I've been to the graves of 131. And I really jumped the shark when I went to presidential cabinet members. So at first I was only going to the famous ones, or ones that, you know, oh, Bobby Kennedy's right near JFK in Arlington, or there's overlap. Oh, Thomas Jefferson was in Washington's cabinet. But so now there's approximately 486 deceased presidential cabinet members. I've been to the graves of 260. I've also been to the graves of 6 of the 3 Stooges. Remember, history major, not math major. So my book released in May 2023, which is available in paperback like we have here, or if you're an ebook person, there is an ebook version. It's 252 pages cover to cover. That includes about 50 pictures have in there, 15 chapters, and it's been very comforting to see that it's been so well received. If you're on the book diary and rating website Goodreads, it has currently an average star rating of 4.53 stars out of 5 stars, and 4.7 out of 5 stars on Amazon. So if you like it, I hope that you will leave it a review, and maybe we can boost those numbers a little bit. So where are the presidents and vice presidents buried? In my travels and in my talks, I've been surprised actually about how many people off the street have thought, oh, aren't they all buried in Arlington National Cemetery? Why did you have to write a book about this and do all this traveling? No, the presidents and the vice presidents and the first ladies are buried in 24 different states and Washington, D.C. So about 5 of these are vice presidents only, like Minnesota or South Carolina or Alabama. But as you can see, they're pretty spread out now, and with Jimmy Carter's passing in December 2024, burial last year, January 2025, now Georgia has been added to that mix. So it's a good way to travel the country, see different places that you're not from, meet new people, and learn different history. Not only just going to the graves, but oftentimes the presidents might be buried at their home or a presidential museum, or there's something nearby. It really shows you the character of the place that they were from, and how the place that they're from, or the town, chooses to remember, interpret, and commemorate these individuals. So my first president and first ladies that I went to, we got John, Abigail, John Quincy, and Louisa Catherine Adams. They are the presidents and first ladies interred closest to where we are now in Warwick and here in Rhode Island in general. So they're just south of Boston in Quincy. So I had been interested in presidents for about a year or more. In 2003, in 2002, my mother, Lynn, had purchased me a book, So You Want to Be President, by author Judith St. George and illustrator David Small, that really captured my attention, got me into the presidents. And it was a year after that, my uncle Craig was living in Quincy at the time, and that summer, he and his girlfriend at the time brought me and my sister to the Adams National Historical Park, where the Adams homes are, like the birthplaces of the 2 presidents, then the kind of family ancestral home, Peacefield or Old House, that they lived in subsequently. And next to that was the church, the United First Parish Church, aka the Church of the Presidents, where these 2 presidents and these 2 first ladies are entombed in the basement. And it was great to be able to go in the John Adams birthplace, where he was when he was 8 years old, just like I was, and I was going through, and then I read about John and Abigail. Now here they were in the physical sense. They were real people. I went to their house, even though they didn't invite me. I went to and I was visiting them now in their final resting place. And I remember being there at 8 years old and kind of putting my fingers over the chiseled sarcophagus lids, and just was really enthralled to be in this hands-on history experience. So there were actually no photos from that first visit. So when I, in the next year, took up this whole journey of I want to go to every president and vice president and first lady, my father said, well, you should really document it. We don't have photos of your first 3 presidents, and so we have to go back. So this is my second visit, Mother's Day, May 9th, 2004. So I was an old 9 at that point. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Lewis Marks Company presidential figurines, but that's what I'm holding there is a John Quincy Adams Marks figurine from the 50s. George, Martha Washington, they are interred at their slavery plantation, Mount Vernon, George Washington's Mount Vernon, not too far outside Washington, D.C. They have, this tomb was built about 30 odd years after they died in the early 1830s. They were originally in a different tomb, which you can still see at the Mount Vernon property. And so this is my 4th presidential gravesite. This is the first time I had my picture taken at one. As you can see, this was a very hot and humid day, and I look like I'm dying and don't want to be there. But believe me, I did. So, so I don't usually wear sleeveless shirts to presidential graves. But, so I was 8, and that's my very first picture ever at a presidential gravesite. Unbeknownst to me, I was also visiting my first Supreme Court Justice gravesite, because George and Martha Washington are in a kind of an antechamber in the front that you can see through the bars there, but there's a back chamber where there's about 25 different Washington family members laid to rest, and that includes Bushrod Washington, George and Martha's nephew, who was a Supreme Court Justice nominated to the court by John Adams. And so he's back there, so that was also my first SCOTUS Justice grave. Now, there's a really interesting history all about George Washington's tomb and how the property was kind of claimed by both the federal government, the Union, and the South during the Civil War, and just interpretation of how, when it was still a slave plantation under, say, Bushrod and subsequent heirs, how enslaved people interpreted the tomb for visitors. Really rich, interesting history that I can't get into too much more right now, but I recommend a book by an acquaintance of mine, Matthew R. Costello, who works is pretty high up at the White House Historical Association. He wrote a book called The Property of the Nation. So all about George Washington's legacy and the physical tomb and the fight over that. So I recommend getting that book after Presidential Grave Hunter, Property of the Nation by Matthew R. Costello. Great book. So does every president have a grand fancy grave, or vice president? And the answer is no. So a lot of them do, but especially when you get to vice presidents, like this is another one nearby. I put him in this presentation because it shows kind of, this is really, I would say, the least ostentatious, most plain vice presidential grave, or between the presidents and the vice presidents. It's also one of the closest. Henry Wilson, the second vice president under Ulysses S. Grant. He was known as the Natick Cobbler. He is interred in the old Dell Park Cemetery in Natick, Massachusetts. So you can go see him today if you wanted to. But as I did on my way to a Red Sox game one day. But So Henry Wilson, pretty plain. There's nothing, if you're not going there looking for him, you really wouldn't know, hey, this was somebody who was one heart attack or assassin's bullet away from being president of the United States. And he actually died in office too, so. But nothing as grand as, say, the presidents who died in office. But the next slide, you'll see my favorite grave, which of all the 3,000 graves I visited, and it is very grand in comparison, especially to Henry Wilson's. This is the tomb of President James Garfield and First Lady Lucretia Garfield. It's located at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I first visited when I was 10 years old in June 2005. You can see me there at the steps for scale. And yes, I've grown a little bit since I was 10. But this is still, as you can see, quite the large gravesite. So this is 180 feet tall, made of Berea sandstone. You can see above the door there, those are life-size terracotta sculptures depicting scenes of President Garfield's life. There's also gargoyles. You can see them sticking out the ends of the deck up there. So rest, you can even go up to the deck and see the Cleveland skyline there. So, and this is a place that, to go inside, it's open only during the warm weather months. So that's a tricky thing sometimes if you're, oh, I've got downtime in December or January I want to go to. Some of these presidential tombs, a couple of them, you can only get inside and see them fully in the warmer weather. It includes the Adamses, so you can't go see the Adamses today. You can see Henry Wilson, but not the Adamses. So this is the inside. I took this picture on a revisit a year and a half ago. So in that kind of main rotunda there, there's this 8-foot tall, plus it's on the dais, 8-foot tall Italian marble statue of James Garfield, our second assassinated president, longtime Congress member, Union general during the Civil War. And there's just all these stained glass windows and chandeliers, and there's just so much going on there. Mosaics. Really must be seen in person to be fully appreciated, but I've tried with the photos. Another kind of weird thing to me and my father about this is, as I said, James Garfield was assassinated. I don't know if anybody watched the recent miniseries. I'm seeing some people nodding their heads, Death by Lightning, about the lead up to the assassination and then his assassination. So this is a mural within the tomb, and it actually depicts Charles Guiteau shooting President Garfield. So that was just really kind of striking to both my father and myself that they would actually depict the scene of that. He's there with Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who, yes, I've also been to his grave because he was Speaker of the House and cabinet member. So in the top left there, that is the inside of the actual crypt. So go down into the basement, and the presidents are usually buried in the ground, or like in the cases of the Adamses or the Washingtons, they're in sarcophagi, stone coffin containers. Not so with President and Mrs. Garfield. You go down there, and their actual caskets are laid out on biers. So now they're enclosed by a wrought iron gate, but my father and I were able to convince the person who had the keys to actually let us in there. And it took a while because they don't usually open it up to the public. In fact, the person who had the keys said that it had been 50 years, other than C-SPAN, that folks had gotten right in there. Now, he might have meant 15, 1-5, but my father and I will swear that he said 50. Regardless, people don't usually get in there. In fact, when we went back in 2024, they said they don't even keep the keys right at the tomb anymore. They're in the front office, so it'd be even harder to finagle that. But something my father always impressed upon me was, with the documentation, is it'd be great to get the best photo possible. Especially, I'd say there's a few presidents like Lyndon Johnson. is a little bit into a cemetery that the public generally isn't allowed to enter, and you can see it with your own eyes, the inscription, but in a photo, the inscription would look so small and far away. So I always try to get as close as I can to the actual interment site. And so there were some places that required special access. So we've got the Garfield tomb in the top left. Bottom left, that is the tomb of Warren Harding and Florence Harding. That's also in Ohio, Marion, Ohio, where they were from. It made a special appointment with the caretaker on that same Garfield trip, actually. Then another Ohio one. There were 5 presidents buried in Ohio. We have in the top right William Henry Harrison and his wife, First Lady Anna Harrison. She was a unique First Lady in that she actually never made it to the White House because she stayed behind at home, was going to travel to Washington, but you may know William Henry Harrison died after only 32 days as president, the shortest presidency. In fact, so I work now, as Dymond said, at the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. We have a public vault that temporarily stored the remains of 3 presidents and First Lady Dolly Madison. Harrison was one of those presidents. He was, again, a president for 32 days, in the White House for a month, and he was in our public vault for 81 days. So he spent more time in our cemetery for just temporary storage than he did in the White House. But so he's there in North Bend, Ohio, just outside of Cincinnati. And then the kind of bleached out photo in the bottom right is Grant's tomb in New York City. Julia Grant and Ulysses Grant are in the sarcophagi there. Now this is a very interesting photo because this was taken very surreptitiously. At the time of this visit in August 2004, photography was prohibited inside Grant's tomb. There were fears, this was still not even quite 3 years after the September 11th terrorist attacks, and they had concerns about, I guess, terrorists seeing the layout of Grant's tomb and wanting to bomb it, apparently. So we weren't even allowed to go into this lower crypt. You were allowed only to view the sarcophagi from the top parapet on the floor above, and we detail it, well, I detail it in the book of our experience. My father, my reluctant sister Olivia, and my mother Lynn, cajoling a sympathetic park ranger to let us go down there and take the photo while his boss, who was not sympathetic, went on a 5-minute break. So that's how we got this photo. Photography is allowed now, but there's also kind of scattered hours there at Grant's tomb, so you gotta schedule your visit well. But that's because it's not the greatest photo. Here's a kind of more blown up version of it. So again, that's August of 2004, still 9 there. So another really formative experience that I detail in the book early on in my quest was that Ronald Reagan died, adding to the list of presidents whose graves I would have to go to. Well, my parents asked me the day he died, would I like to go see him lie in state? Now at this point, he was the first president to die during my lifetime. I was born a few months after Nixon died in '94. And even then, Nixon hadn't lain in state. The last president to lie in state was Lyndon Johnson in 1973. So it had been over 30 years since a president had lain in state in the U.S. Capitol. Didn't know how rare that'd be going forward. So my parents asked, would you like to go? And I said, yes. And then the very next day, on the Sunday, my father broke his arm playing football. He went for a fumble recovery and somebody landed on his arm. He would like me to point out that he did recover the football. But there were just so many difficulties that set in that, money was tight, try not to get plane tickets, so we would drive, and then the Capitol got evacuated because Governor of Kentucky Ernie Fletcher's plane flew over the Capitol, and they thought maybe that's a terrorist attack. So we weren't going. All my grandparents thought that we were going to our certain death by going to see Reagan lie in state at the Capitol. So it wasn't happening until it did, and then my father drove the 400 miles with the arm. As you can see, it's up past his elbow, so there was no flexibility there. So one arm driving down to DC from Orchard Farms Elementary School in Cranston, and that was especially nerve-wracking for me when he has this ritual of tapping the dashboard to Sweet Judy Blue Eyes by Crosby, Stills and Nash, and there's always a point like queuing up, I'm like, put your hand on the wheel and everything. But so that's in the National Cathedral the day after Reagan's funeral had been there, and you believe that that was the hymn book that then President George W. Bush had used during that day. So more details of that in the Rip the Gipper, R.I.P. the Gipper chapter of my book. So sometimes we've gotten locked in cemeteries. In fact, I never got locked in a cemetery until this one trip in April of 2010, where in a 7-day trip, my father and I got locked in 3 cemeteries on 3 different days. 2 on accident, and 1 on purpose because they were closing where Vice President Garrett Hobart is in Paterson, New Jersey. And in my mindset, I'm thinking, well, New Jersey's only about 200 or so miles away from Rhode Island. It's not too far. We can come back another time. My dad's mentality is, we're here now. And the trailer says he's kind of a zany and boundary pushing. So he asked the employee who was locking up the cemetery, can you lock us in there and we'll find our way out, don't worry, and everything. So he would, I didn't say this was okay, but I was, so what was I was 15 at that time, and I said, so there we were, so ran around, got the mausoleum of Vice President Garrett Hobart, and then we had to find our way out. This cemetery was entirely enclosed by barbed wire. Some of it was a chain link fence. Some of it was this wall with the barbed wire over it, as you can see. So, but we did manage to get out. That's, again, also in the book, but had to take this for documentation once we got out to show part of what we were contending with. So, yeah, zany and boundary pushing, and that'll come up again in a little bit. So, Nelson Rockefeller, of the 42 vice president graves that you can visit technically, his is not supposed to be visitable. It's on the private Rockefeller family cemetery in Sleepy Hollow, New York, along the Hudson River. Rockefeller vice president for Gerald Ford. We contacted, it was then Senator J. Rockefeller, West Virginia, nephew of the vice president. His office sent us to the Rockefeller Center, Plaza headquarters, and they said no, and I was willing to let this go because my inspirations for visiting the vice president graves and president graves were Richard Norton Smith, a historian, and Brian Lamb, who, full circle moment, you saw in the trailer interviewing me. They had gone to, both had gone to the presidents, and then Brian Lamb had gone to all the vice presidents, except he couldn't get Nelson Rockefeller's. And he, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, all his prestige, power, he couldn't convince Mrs. Rockefeller to let him in. So I was like, well, if even Brian Lamb can't get in to see Nelson Rockefeller, I'm okay saying, letting it go. And my father wasn't. So he scouted the area, and as you can see in the trailer, calling it an act of God. a giant tree had fallen on the fence adjoining the Rockefeller Family Cemetery and a more public cemetery, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. So he went in there, found Nelson Rockefeller's grave, and got me back there a week later so that I could visit and get this photo. So, and so that really got me notoriety, especially for a while. When I met Brian Lamb, we sat down in his office. Within 20 seconds, I really just sitting down, he's like, "How did you do it?" I'm like, well, it's like, "Oh, tell me." And then within 7 minutes, he decided he wanted to put me on TV. So I was 20 at the time, and that was quite an experience. So again, that's another chapter in there. So photos of the Rockefeller grave are pretty rare. There was a point, I haven't looked recently, but there was a point where there were only 3 photos of the Rockefeller grave on the internet, and 2 of them were mine. So pretty rare instance of Vice President Rockefeller's grave site there in Sleepy Hollow, New York. So my book is not just about dead historical figures, though. It's about people who were living when I met them, and some have since passed away. That does include James Lavelle, as is in the book trailer, former homicide detective who was handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald when he was shot by Jack Ruby on live television November 24th, 1963. The gentleman in the Resistol hat and light-colored suit. So he was also at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. He was aboard the USS Whitney. So I saw in this documentary that I watched that he was still alive, and I wrote to him, snail mail, that I was heading down to Texas to visit what was then my 36th and final president grave, Lyndon B. Johnson, and said that I would like to interview him for my website, kurtzhistoricscience.com. And he wrote back to me via email just 3 days later saying, "Be great to meet me, and here's his cell phone number," and everything. So I went and had this interview with him. It's just under an hour, and it's available to watch on my YouTube channel, which you can get to from my website, kurtzhistoricscience.com. But very interesting guy, very sharp. He since passed away. He lived to 99. He was 91 at the time of our meeting. We spent 3 hours with him at his place. He was very generous and very interested in my hands-on history and grave hunting projects. But so again, I'm more of the straight-laced, straight-edge person. My father is not. So that brings us to this photo, which some people find off-putting, but it's happened. So, and it's a crucial part of my life. So my father and I were working on a television show concept called Scofflaws, America's Least Wanted. We know blue laws, like here in Rhode Island, I don't know if it's still in the books, but it's illegal to sell toothpaste and a toothbrush to the same person on a Sunday. Or like can't string ropes across the bridge. Yes, that makes sense, yes. But then there's some weirder ones, like it's illegal to go whaling in the state of Kansas. So at the time, the 2012 Republican National Convention, it was determined that because of Florida's open carry laws and the Second Amendment, that you'd be within a certain degree of distance would be able to bring your guns to the Republican National Convention. However, you would get arrested if you brought certain items they prohibited, such as super soakers and squirt guns. Also tennis balls and umbrellas with tips on them. So my father learned from his friend Mike Paquin from Philly that that this was happening, and my father said, "Well, we have this interview Kurt's doing for his website arranged with Mr. Lavelle. What if we could get him to recreate this famous Pulitzer Prize winning photograph, but with a super soaker for promo for our TV show concept, which actually for a while we were then attached to, as our producer, Vin DeBona, a Rhode Island native from Cranston, who actually is the creator and producer of America's Funniest Home Videos. So, little Rhode Island connection there. This was before we met Vin. But so I wanted nothing to do with this. I was like, you're gonna ruin my history interview with this Pearl Harbor survivor. And so all sorts of craziness. We had to switch around the schedule. Again, I don't want to spoil too much from the book, but as you can see, the photo ended up happening. Mr. Lavelle was totally game for it, and he was somebody who believed that everybody should have a gun, like literally everybody, and we'd be all more safe that way. So he thought it was ridiculous, the Super Soaker thing, and he said, I definitely want to do this. And we had brought just in case he didn't have a hat, we brought a hat that we got from Target that was a pretty lame excuse, and he said, he took one look at that and was like, I'll be back. He went back into his place and got that hat, which is a better comparison to the one he wore in 1963. So yes, that is me. I'm 17 there as Lee Harvey Oswald. That's my father. With the Super Soaker as Jack Ruby, and that is actually the same model hat that Jack Ruby had, except my father has a bigger head. Take that however you want. So I've also met two living presidents. Well, they were living at the time. One has since passed. Not this one. Bill Clinton. So this was my first president that I met. This was April 2005. I was 10 years old. This was at the Brown bookstore, the Brown University's bookstore on Thayer Street in Providence. And once again, photography was prohibited at this event, but that's my father, and you know how this is going. So we actually snuck in a camera. He, stuck it, had me stick it in my pocket because I would get less in trouble with the Secret Service, we figured, at 10 years old, and managed to get this photograph with Bill Clinton. So that's an interesting chapter in the book, I think, in particular. And then in a full circle moment, so this would be 18 years after that photo, my book, Presidential Grave Hunter, came out, and my very first, he was there for a book event, a book signing of his autobiography, My Life, at the Brown bookstore. And 18 years later, full circle moment, my very first book talk was in the Brown bookstore. And for that book talk, I read part of that chapter in the place where it happened. Not the room where it happened, Hamilton fans, but because that was the second floor. This was the book talk was the first floor. But so that was quite an interesting experience as well, as you can imagine. The second president that I met, now passed away, Jimmy Carter, along with his wife, First Lady Rosalind Carter. If you've been saying Roslyn, you've been wrong. As we found out, because there's a woman who would prepare you to meet President Carter, who would teach at the Sunday school, Maranatha Baptist Church. And so you'd go through this hour-long prep. Miss Jan Williams would prep you, and she was like a drill sergeant. And where is President Carter and Mrs. Carter going to be buried? And we're raising our hands. Right? They'll be buried at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library in Atlanta. She goes, wrong! They'll be buried here in Plains in their front yard. All right. And it's like, and what is Mrs. Carter's first name? Like, Rosalind. She's like, wrong! It's Rosalind. She's named after two women, Rose and Lynn. Like, all right. And then there's a lot of only talk or raise your hand if President Carter is looking at your specific section of pews. If you're a left pew person and you speak when he's looking at the right pews, Lord help you, kind of thing. But Jimmy Carter himself, very nice and everything, but that was part of Miss Jan's job, unofficial, or I guess volunteer job there, was to make sure that you would be in accordance to all the policies. So yes, Rosalind Carter.
If I may, just one
Yes.
second. Let's just say I'm the crazy zany one, right?
Yeah.
Look, who wears shorts? to a Baptist church in Georgia to meet the President of the United States. Only one person, okay.
All right, people were there in Batman t-shirts. Okay, so it was.
But they were wearing
June.
pants.
It was June and it was hot. So I don't see anything wrong with that. He was stopped from going into the Sistine Chapel in the '80s for wearing shorts. The time has changed. I don't know. But also, this was not the Sistine Chapel. This was Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains, population 700. But so this was a very quick interaction, and people were also just surprised, like how just like the size difference. Jimmy Carter, shrunk a little bit. As my mom will tell you, sometimes people get older, they lose a little bit of the height, and. We listened to Jimmy Carter teach Sunday school for about 45 minutes. And so that was quite experience. So I would say that a lot of people, their favorite chapter of the book is this final chapter, meeting the Carters. So unfortunately, as we know, time does march on, and Jimmy and Rosalind lived another 11, 12 years after that meeting, just about. But they passed away, and they are indeed buried now in a lawn area across from their home in Plains, where they had lived since about 1960. And they are in this garden, so there's a butterfly garden behind those shrubs. And Rosalind Carter actually designed the gravesite there, and actually based off of the graves of Pat and Richard Nixon in California. So I imagine they liked the style. They weren't necessarily, because it's Pat and Richard Nixon, necessarily. I can't imagine Jimmy Carter was a big Nixon fan. But so just kind of simple granite gravestones. And it opened to the public in July of last year. My father and I were down there in August. So it was quite interesting to be there when the Carters were alive and now that they had passed. But I mean, again, it's a town of 700 people. So Jimmy Carter lived to 100, Rosalind Carter was 96. They knew everybody in town. Everybody shops at the same Dollar General. There's only 2 restaurants. So they're very much, even in death, still and always will be defining part of that community. So here's some photos showing their actual gravestones, and so pretty simple and just lists different things that they did. So like Jimmy Carter, was governor and president, and was a founder of the Carter Center. And same with Rosalind Carter, First Lady of Georgia, First Lady of the United States, and her center. So I've also done, as of October, I've gotten my first international graves, but a couple of them do have U.S. presidential ties. So this was my very first ever international grave in October in Italy, in Florence, and that is Larkin Mead's grave. He was the architect of Abraham Lincoln's tomb. So like many sculptors, just marble and great in Italy and a great place to work. So he was U.S. born, but at some point moved to Italy. That's where he's buried. So I, on a 2024 revisit to Lincoln's tomb, there's a shop just outside the cemetery, and I got this Lincoln tomb shirt. So I brought it to Italy to take a photo with it at the grave of the architect of Lincoln's tomb. So again, jumped the shark a long time ago. So pretty interesting looking graves there too, I gotta say, Larkin Mead. And then we actually have someone who's technically a U.S. First Lady buried in Italy. So not a spousal First Lady, but a White House hostess, Rose Cleveland, the sister of Grover Cleveland. So you may know that when Grover Cleveland first came into the presidency, he was a bachelor, had not married Frances Folsom yet, and so his sister Rose stepped in to that vacancy. And she was actually, and you don't normally think about this in that period of time, but she was actually a lesbian. She was in a same-sex relationship, eventually with a woman. They moved to Italy together, and Rose was a nurse during World War I, and she actually, just about when the war ended in 1918, she got sick, caring for the soldiers, and she died, and so she's buried there in Italy with the woman that she was in a relationship with. They're buried next to each other in this little village in Italy. So I was there for a friend's wedding, and there was a morning where there wasn't much going on, so I drove an hour 45 minutes to get this one grave, and then head back to the remaining activities. So our foreign buried First Lady, Rose Cleveland. So the last portion of my presentation, I always like to highlight this project from some friends of mine at Roadside America. They are experts in quirky things that people can see. So usually it's not presidential, like say the potato head statues we have here in Rhode Island. I know there's not that many remaining, but those are on their website and their regular app, or things like the world's largest bowl of twines, or oddities like that. But they also, much to my delight, have a Roadside Presidents app. And I have been to the 661 different presidential sites in the US that are on this app. And it's a great feature because you can look by president, you can look by state, and I like that there's a map I can check off which places I've been to, or you can see, again, by president how many sites there are. So this map, I believe, shows the 55 Ulysses S. Grant related sites that are on the app across the country, and they'll give you directions, GPS pinpoint, photos if they have them, hours, descriptions. So it's great. So I go to the graves, but I also go to the homes, the museums, the roadside plaques where various things happen. And you can see with my father also fan a little bit of the irreverent to go along with the reverent sites. So roadside presidents, I've included a few of the more maybe odd sites that I've been to of those 661. So that's right. I know you're jealous that I have been to the parking lot memorial where Abraham Lincoln's father got married for the second time. Please don't express your jealousy. But so that's in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. My father and I were cutting through in 2013, and yes, so Lincoln's stepmother, Sarah Johnston, was a big influence in his life, and encouraging him to read and learn, which was something that his father, Thomas, did not encourage of our 16th president. And so Lincoln himself was not there, but this was a crucial moment in his life. But it is right now a parking space, and they have this. You can see this illustration, blown up of Thomas Lincoln and Sarah Johnston Lincoln, and interpretive signage there. I did, in taking these photos, I dropped my phone and damaged it, and it couldn't text for about a day or so. Luckily, whatever it was resolved, but also kind of scratched the screen a little bit. I'm like, well, that's embarrassing to damage it at the parking space memorial where Abraham Lincoln's father got married for the second time. This is a weird one. I visited this just in November. This is the title that Roadside America uses on their app because, again, they're trying to grab people in with the quirkiness of it. And as you can see, this is not a great bust. No offense to the sculptor, but it's scaly, and that's why they call it the eyeless lizard skin JFK head, because it really does look by that. That's in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and it was sculpted in 1964, so just after Kennedy's assassination, and it was actually unveiled at the 1964 Democratic Party National Convention. So with, I don't know how if it was like on the main stage and they revealed it and everything. But so this is a unique place that you can also see. This is outside in Asbury Park, and yeah, it just reminds. It's kind of right if JFK and a lizard and Michael Myers were all blended together. It's a weird one. So I'm now living in Washington, D.C. I moved down there in September 2023. And the thing about Washington, D.C., you know, we are not a state, and we do not get voting representation in Congress. And there's about 700,000 people, including myself, who live in Washington, D.C., and therefore don't have that voting representation. So that was one downside of leaving Rhode Island, not having senators or a Congress person. So this mural gagged George Washington, representing the voicelessness of the city, the capital of our nation, that is named after him. So the artist Anikin Udofia first painted this in 2011, and then it was repainted in 2024 and 2025. And then there is a Rhode Island presidential set. There's actually a few that are on the app, but I wanted to specifically point out this one because I had a little hand in it. This is where, here in the town of Warwick, where Rutherford B. Hayes had the first ever presidential phone call. Did anybody know that that happened here? Yeah, the very first presidential phone call happened at Rocky Point Park on June 28th, 1877. That was one quibble I had. They put on, and the people in charge of this put June 29th. And well, you put the wrong date. But so in June 28th, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes, the President of the United States, went to Rocky Point, attended a clam bake, and also there was a reunion of Civil War veterans, and he had the very first phone call for a president. It was with Alexander Graham Bell, who was at a hotel in Providence at the time. So I had been trying to get this marked in some way, and what the people, when I finally connected with some people who were working on it, I told them, do you know that there is an image, not a photograph, but a lithograph or something, engraving of Hayes at Rocky Point Park in June 1877 during that visit. It's not while he's on the phone, he's like tasting a clam or something. But so I provided them with that, and then they put it on the sign. And did they get the date wrong? Yes. Did they not tell me when the unveiling was so that I could attend it? Yeah, they also didn't do that. Was it already somehow damaged about a week or two after its installation? Also yes. But victory. So it was. So that's part of the Rocky Point Pathways project, and as you can see, I guess you can't really see it, but so that's in 2017, and I'm wearing my Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library shirt there. So, so again, that's another place you can visit. I don't know what shape the sign is these days, but yes, the very first presidential phone call occurred in the town we are currently in, and I believe. So Alexander Graham Bell just explained to Hayes, like, I am talking to you through so many miles of wire, blah, blah, blah. And Hayes, just, the very first presidential reply was, could you please talk a little slower? So that is my presentation. Again, thank you all for welcoming here today. And my mother especially thanks you for getting me up here from DC so that she can see me and hug me. But so on there, my contact, so website, so you can go to presidentialgravehunter.com. That's the book page on my kurtzhistoricscience.com website, but it's just easier telling people, presidentialgravehunter.com. We'll get you there. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, there's my email. And again, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for your interest in history. I hope that you go out and engage in hands-on history and do some great stuff.
Kurt, that was very interesting. It's just a token of appreciation. So we've learned a lot about President's Day program. So now I would like to invite State Vice Regent Rebecca Fairbank to come forward to get the Voices pulled and contagious